Arthur Sterling was a man who measured the world in risk and reward. As the head of Sterling Aerospace, he lived in a penthouse that was more of a bunker than a home. His mistrust wasn't born of arrogance, but of a brutal history. His own brother had once tried to sell company secrets to a competitor. To Arthur, a smile was just a mask for a motive. When Elena arrived for the housekeeping interview, she was a stark contrast to the cold marble of his home. She didn't smell of expensive perfume, but of lemon polish and hard work. He hired her not because he liked her, but because her background was so clean it felt suspicious. Arthur's tests were psychological warfare. On Tuesday, he left a vintage Rolex worth $80,000 resting on the edge of the bathroom sink. On Wednesday, a stack of high-denomination bills sat in a laundry basket. He watched the hidden cameras, expecting to see her hesitate, to see that flicker of greed that he believed lived in everyone. But Elena moved with a robotic efficiency. She moved the watch to a velvet tray and placed the cash in a sealed baggie with a note, "Found in the wash, please check pockets next time." Arthur was annoyed. He felt like a fisherman who couldn't get a bite. The grocery test was designed to be a soft trap. He gave her a corporate card and $1,000 in cash for miscellaneous expenses. He knew the receipts would only total $400. Most people would skim the rest, justifying it as a tip from a billionaire. When Elena returned, she presented an itemized spreadsheet she had built on her own time. She accounted for every cent, including the nickel she found in the parking lot. "It wasn't mine," she said simply when he questioned her. Arthur realized she wasn't just honest, she was disciplined. Arthur decided to escalate to Project Phoenix, the blueprint for a new hydrogen engine. He left the blueprints splayed across his study desk, knowing a rival firm, Vane Industries, would pay millions for a single photo of the schematics. He checked his remote logs all night, waiting for her to linger in the room. Instead, she entered, saw the documents, and immediately drew the heavy blackout curtains so the neighbors couldn't see in with long-range lenses. She didn't look at the math, she looked at the security risk. Arthur sat in his office across town, stunned by her instinct to protect him. The transition from housekeeper to assistant was a scandal in the Sterling building. The board of directors whispered about the maid in the inner circle. Arthur ignored them. He saw something they didn't, a woman who couldn't be bought. On her first day at the office, he gave her a desk right outside his glass-walled sanctuary. "Your job isn't to get coffee," he told her. "Your job is to be the filter. If someone is lying to me, I want you to find the hole in their story." Elena nodded, her eyes sharp. The game had changed. Elena spent her first month in silence, absorbing the complex language of aerospace engineering and venture capital. She stayed late every night, studying the company's history. Arthur began to notice small changes. His briefings were more concise. His flights were redirected to avoid turbulence she'd predicted using weather patterns. And his coffee was always the perfect temperature. She was becoming his external brain. He found himself looking toward her desk whenever a difficult question was asked in a meeting, finding comfort in her steady presence. The moment of truth arrived during a merger negotiation with a German conglomerate. The Germans were using a complex formula to hide a projected loss in their manufacturing wing. Arthur's top analysts were nodding along, fooled by the jargon. Elena, sitting in the back, stood up and walked to the whiteboard. "If you factor in the variable for rising fuel costs," she said, scribbling a correction to their equation, "your valuation is inflated by $200 million. The room went silent. Arthur looked at the board, then at Elena. She wasn't just a filter, she was a polymath. "Why were you cleaning my floors, Elena?" Arthur asked that night, his voice echoing in the empty boardroom. Elena leaned against the mahogany table. Because my father died with debts I didn't incur, and my mother's dialysis doesn't pay for itself. Cleaning was the only job that paid cash daily. She looked at her hands. I have a master's in applied mathematics, Arthur, but a degree doesn't put food on the table when you're being hounded by collectors. For the first time, Arthur felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years, genuine empathy. Arthur began to treat her as an equal. He shared his deepest anxieties, the fear that his father's legacy would crumble under his watch. They stopped eating at separate tables. They shared takeout over blueprints and laughed at the absurdity of the corporate elite. One evening, while celebrating a successful launch, Arthur reached out and tucked a stray hair behind her ear. The touch lasted a second too long to be professional. Elena didn't pull away. The glass fortress didn't just have a crack, the walls were beginning to melt. Marcus Thorne, Arthur's bitterest rival, noticed the ECO's new weakness. He intercepted Elena at the hospital where her mother was treated. He offered her a check for $5 million. Just one thumb drive. He'll never know it was you, Thorne whispered. Elena looked at the check. It was the answer to every prayer she had ever had. Then she thought of Arthur's eyes when he finally trusted her. She took the check, walked to the nearest trash can, and dropped it in. She called Arthur before she even reached her car. Arthur didn't take her to a fancy gala for their first date. He took her to a quiet observatory. He had rented the entire place so they could look at the stars, the very things his rockets were trying to reach. I spent my life looking for enemies, Arthur confessed as they looked through the telescope. I forgot to look for friends. Elena took his hand. Trust isn't something you find, Arthur. It's something you build, brick by brick. That night, under the light of distant suns, they shared their first kiss. The maid was now the most powerful woman in the company. Elena restructured the entire R&D department, saving millions and investing it back into employee benefits. The staff loved her, and because they loved her, they became more loyal to Arthur. He realized that trust wasn't a weakness that led to betrayal, it was a currency that bought loyalty. They were no longer CEO and assistant, they were a singular force of nature, redefining the industry one breakthrough at a time. 2 years after she first walked into his home, Arthur called Elena to the study. On the desk was the same envelope he'd used to test her with money. I have one more test, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Elena opened it. Inside was a piece of paper, not a check, but a map of a beautiful estate in the country. I bought this for your mother, and there's one more thing. He pulled a small black box from his pocket. I've spent my life protecting my heart. I'd like to officially hand the keys over to you. The wedding was held at the estate Arthur had bought for her family. It was a celebration of two worlds colliding, the billionaire and the girl who had worked her way up from the bottom. When they said their vows, Arthur didn't talk about love in a poetic sense. He talked about data. The probability of finding someone like you, he told the guests, was statistically 0. But Elena taught me that sometimes the most important things in life are the ones you can't calculate. The sterling aerospace empire grew, but the house was no longer a fortress, it was a home. They eventually had children who were taught the value of $1 and the weight of a promise. Arthur still kept his security cameras, but he used them to watch his kids play in the garden, not to spy on his staff. He had learned the greatest lesson a man of his stature could learn. A rich man with no trust is the poorest man on earth, but a man with a partner he can rely on is truly invincible. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire, teach, and entertain. Until next time, bye!